Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today it is the 12th of October and I will just be going over the front lines, not really what occurred on the 11th of October, although there were a lot of airstrikes. I really don't have time to cover that, although I did update the map accordingly based off of what occurred, and I did add in some geolocations, so if you're interested to see what occurred, you can look at my map and I have everything there. But anyway, I'm just going to talk about the front lines today very quickly. And so we're going to start out with Kherson, of course, where we have reports that the 35th Marine Brigade was assaulting Russian positions around Kostromka to Ishchenka. And so you're seeing some recon units sort of probing into the Russian lines that are really centered around Bruskinsky in this specific area. In terms of Ukrainian units in this area, you did have some rotation where some reinforcements were sent in. So specifically, the 115th Separate Mechanized Brigade was moved in into this direction to sort of supplement the 46th Air Assault Brigade and the 74th Reconnaissance Battalion, which was also just sent in. And so that's interesting because now you have a recon unit, which just further confirms the fact that really Ukraine is focusing on recon right now, which is a part of their strategy where they probe the lines before they find a weak point and then they try to force the Russians to retreat instead of fighting them in an open battle. In addition, there were some ammo shipments to this settlement over here, Bila Krenitsia, and you have a pontoon crossing from that town to Bilohirka, and then from there it gets dispersed to the front line. In addition, we have news of an ANTPQ-50 lightweight counter mortar radar system, which was actually deployed in Andriivka over here in this town. And so that's supposed to sort of locate where shelling is coming from. So it sort of like gets a look at the either mortar or artillery shells that are fired by Russia, and then they're able to track the coordinates from which they were fired and then strike those areas. So it's a very cool piece of technology, and it does show that there are sort of like a lot of artillery duels going on around here, specifically around the Andriivka front and around Suki Stavak. And then you also have something similar going on around Dudchani, where you have Ukrainian artillery units sort of firing onto the Russian lines on Milove. You also have a lot of ambiguity as to what's going on in this minor town over here called Piatikhatki. I had originally said that it was under Ukrainian control, but there's no proof of this. But there is proof that Ukraine is in literally all of the towns north of it. So if they were actually in this town by now, we would have seen footage. And so I'm inclined to believe that it is a gray zone right now because the main Russian line is over here. And so it's probably abandoned. You just have some like recon units going in throughout the day and just sporadic engagements around here. But I did adjust the map accordingly. There were also some movements of Ukrainian units that I have to show you guys. So, first of all, the 60th Separate Infantry Brigade set camp in this town over here, Novomikhailivka, and then the 17th Tank Brigade set camp in this minor town called Ukrainka, which is located over here. And the last update out of Kherson is that you do have now training of several new battalions of Ukrainian units from mobilized citizens in Kryvyi and Apostolove, and so they will soon be sent to the northern Kherson front. But anyway, let's move on to the Bakhmut front. I still don't want to talk about Zaporizhia, but I will be adding units to this map, hopefully over the weekend, because I do want to go in depth as to what's potentially going to happen over here. But for now, let's be more material and talk about what's actually occurred. And so I did make some changes to the map on Bakhmut. So first of all, the most glaring change is that Ivanhrad is now under Russian control, or at least it is contested. And so this occurred very recently. You had the Wagner Group advance a few hundred meters every single day, and they did take over this clay deposit. They also took over this gypsum plant, and they got control of the plaster caves. And so we actually have geolocated footage from here. Not of this. This is a mistake, but from here. I geolocated this myself. This is of Ukrainian units shelling the Wagner Group, and you can see that they're hiding behind the plaster caves. And there are actually a lot of foxholes that you can see over here. All these dots, those are actually foxholes that are used to hide from enemy fire. And so you can see that the entire area just outside of Bakhmut is very heavily fortified, and there are several layers of defense as you approach the city, which is why it's so difficult to actually take it over. And so Wagner, they've entrenched themselves on the plaster caves, and then from there they were able to make it into Ivanhrad. In addition to coming in from the east, they also came in from the south, which is why taking Zaitsev was so important. Once they took it, they can send their mechanized units in the direction of Ivanhrad from the south, and they were able to take it over, although it's not fully cleared yet. But we do have information about sort of like the frontal units, the recon units, sort of probing into Opitny, and so Opitny will also be contested in the coming days. And there's also sort of rumors, but no confirmation, that there were recon units that were able to cross the Bakhmutovka River and sort of operate just to the south of this dam over here. So that is all important to note. Also, we have geolocated footage from a Ukrainian counterattack on the asphalt plant. So you can see how the asphalt plant, it was taken actually like 2 weeks ago, but we only got like real footage of it very recently of Ukraine shelling it. So you can see that they're still very close to this area, and so they have not fully retreated yet. It's possible that they have some sort of fortifications in this circled area, so that might be under Ukrainian control. And then from there, obviously, they're launching assaults throughout the day, but it seems as if they were unsuccessful in taking it, although both sides had casualties both in manpower and in material. One last change to the map that I made was around here, where it was reported that the Wagner Group was approaching the road junction in between the road that crosses through Pithorodny. I think it's the E40 highway, and then the road from Soledar and Bakhmut. And so they were approaching this junction over here, and so the gas station is now under their control. So they do have a pathway to Pithorodny later on, and they also have a new area to attack Bakhmut from, so they can sort of come in from the north and reach some of these fields over here in this forested area and reach some of the residential areas, because they really have not taken really any residential areas just yet. They are still setting up positions in the eastern part of the city. Specifically, this area over here that I'm highlighting is actually pretty high in elevation, and so once they get control of this area, they can use this as sort of like a shelling position and very heavily shell not only the eastern side, but most importantly the western side, where you have more Ukrainian at the moment groupings and more units stationed in this area. You have the 115th Detached Territorial Defense Brigade, which was just sent in. I have them on the map, but I need to also add in a bunch of other units from the Ukrainian side and also from the Russian side that are operating around Bakhmut. So, in terms of other Ukrainian units that I am aware of, you have the 93rd Brigade, and they were sort of responsible for a lot of the attacks on the Wagner Group. They are firing a lot of artillery on Wagner positions, specifically around the asphalt plant. But you also have the 58th and the 54th Motorized Brigades, and also the 127th Territorial Defense Brigade. And so they're all operating in this area. When looking at the topographic map, there's actually another area that is pretty heavily fortified, and that is the area around Klishchivka, which is another key town because it is very heavily fortified. And if it were to be taken, which I do expect the Wagner Group to sort of make a move over here, they would be able to get some good shelling positions, not only of southern Bakhmut, but also of the road leaving Bakhmut. So if the Ukrainian units decide to retreat at some point, they would have very good positions to fire on them as they reach Ivanivske. And so the Ukrainians, they need to make sure that they are able to hold the line around Klishchivka. And so for now, it's still under their control, but it is tentative as the Wagner Group approaches. First, they would probably have to reach Andriivka, and of course, they need to deal with the grouping in Kurdyumivka and Zelonopilia. There were still Ukrainian units in here, and none of them were actually expelled yet. And so those have to be dealt with before really there could be any sort of ground assault on Toretsk. Because again, Toretsk is one of the most fortified cities on all of the line right now in Donbass. And so if the Russians actually want to get full control of Donetsk, then they actually need to take Toretsk. And you can see that the front line has like really not changed at all in this area. Shumi, Pivdenia, they were already contested during the war in Donbass. Nothing has really changed in this area. And so you need to see the Ukrainians totally knocked out of this area in order to see any sort of advances. And so what's being said about Bakhmut is that if it's taken, there could be some sort of further breakthrough to the west. But the thing that I'm wondering about is how fortified these other cities are. Like, look at Chasiv Yar. This is another huge city in here where you have a lot of Ukrainian units stationed. Will it be taken in a day? Well, that's very unlikely because of how fortified it is and because there are so many units in there. And so I don't think that taking Bakhmut would like eliminate the sort of possibility of heavy fighting in other cities in Donbass. But because the Ukrainian units have been fighting in Bakhmut for so long, they might suffer heavy casualties, or a lot of them might surrender in some sort of upcoming battle. And so the sort of casualties that they take might affect the future course of battles in places like Chasiv Yar, for instance, or also in Kostiantynivka, which is a key supply hub right now. And then looking into the future, also Kramatorsk and say Slavyansk. And so that's really the importance of Bakhmut, especially given the fact that there are about 30,000 Ukrainian troops in this area, give or take. And so the Wagner group is outnumbered in this area. Nonetheless, they have been able to make very marginal gains, but it has been over a very prolonged period of time. Now let's move on to Spirne, where again, Spirne is another very important town that has been sort of turned into a fortress by Ukraine. They've sent a lot of fortifications and they've sent a lot of units to this area. I'm pretty sure that the gas compression center is still under Ukrainian control, so I apologize for having it as marked red. But here you can see a video that was geolocated of the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade assaulting Ukrainian positions on Spirne. And you can see how they're just roaming through the plains with their tanks. And there really isn't mud yet, and so this is still possible, but I am wondering when Rasputitsa will really start to kick in, maybe in a few weeks or so. And then that could potentially limit the amount of mechanized assaults that occur in this area. Nonetheless, it is important to note that Spirne could sort of be a springboard for Ukraine to re-enter Luhansk in the area around Lysychansk, which is why Russia does not want Ukraine to have this really good position. And so they're trying at all costs to take it back. Now, let's move on to the Kremina line, where again, there's still so much ambiguity, and so I don't want to make conclusive statements. So just know that there's so many conflicting reports. What I've ascertained from Russian sources, and then I'll also talk about Ukrainian sources, but first Russian sources. In terms of Ukrainian units in this area, we have the 66th Mechanized Brigade and the 111th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade. And so they rotated some troops out following the very heavy fighting in this area. And so you actually had some reinforcements from the 118th Territorial Defense Brigade being sent to Yampolivka. Here's a Ukrainian map showing the situation. So I just want to like juxtapose my map to this map, just so you get a good idea of what the Ukrainians are saying. This is from the Deep State website. And so you can see how they have literally all this area marked as a gray zone, which does confirm really that the map is very fluid and it's impossible to get a direct sort of mapping of what's going on at the moment. But now let's move on to the, say, Svatove Starobilsk front over here. Really, you're seeing Ukraine push the Russians back towards the Zherebets River, really kicking them out of Kharkiv Oblast and back into the Luhansk Oblast as they approach Svatove. The gains have been more limited in recent days, but they did really re-enter some vacant towns such as Pereshotreneve and a bunch of these towns along this road over here. So you see that the Russian lines of defense are actually situated on roads and rivers mainly. And so if Ukraine can find like one gap in those lines, and they could very easily turn a minor sort of breakthrough into a very large breakthrough, which could lead to a full scale retreat, which is what we saw previously. And so I think that's what Ukraine is looking for right now as they are fighting along the Zherebets River. So we have news about the situation a bit further north, where you actually had the Kraken Battalion and the 14th Brigade approaching very close to Kislivka, which is very bad news because Kislivka is a key supply hub over here, and it is good for setting up artillery positions on Svatove. That's something that could occur as time goes on, and they would be able to then further go south and reach some other key towns such as Kuzimivka, and then you could see like some very heightened shelling of Svatove and its environs, where you have defensive fortifications set up. Basically, all of the area to the east of Svatove is very high in elevation, juxtaposed to the city of Svatove itself, because it's in sort of a valley, I would say, because of the river that's passing through it. And so that puts the Russian garrison in here in danger, which is why they do need to keep some distance away. They need to keep Svatove away from the front line. They need to maintain some distance there. Right now, it's about, I would say, what, 11, 12 miles. And so you're seeing a lot of reinforcements being sent in by Russia, which has partially helped stabilize the situation over here. Specifically, there were a lot of reinforcements coming in from the 47th Guards Tank Division, and yesterday they really supplied about 100 new infantry fighting vehicles. So you're seeing that every day a lot of new equipment is being sent in, a lot of new reserves are being sent in, and also, as I talked about before, with the Russian lines of defense being around roads, you're actually seeing a lot of sapper units, these engineers that are coming in to the like sort of rear of the Russian lines around these roads and constructing defensive fortifications in order to prevent a sort of mechanized breakthrough like we saw in Balaklia. And so these sappers, they're constructing dragon's teeth. There was actually some cool footage of that from the Donbass area. And so they're putting those on either side of the railroad tracks and of the roads in order to really prevent any sort of infantry fighting vehicles or tanks or whatever from crossing through these roads. And so that is interesting to look at the Russian strategy in that regard. Now, last thing that I want to talk about is a reported attack on Vilshana from the 14th Brigade, which has several battalions stuck in Tavolzhanka, this bridgehead over here. They have not been able to break through into the town of Tavolzhanka that is still contested, but they are trying to force the Russians back from Vilshana in order to fully connect with the rest of the 14th Brigade, which is in here, and with the 92nd Brigade. And so they're attacking in a two-pronged attack in that direction. And so we will see the results of that. Also, we're seeing that they staged some assaults on the night of October 10th in the direction of Kremina. And so they've been doing that for a week, and that the superior Russian artillery was able to knock them back. And then the Russians actually went on the offensive and captured many towns that are along the Zherebets River, kicking the Ukrainians out and back towards Zarichny. And so in the process, they took Torske and Terny. Now, there were some revisions made to this claim later on by Ryvar specifically. So now they're actually showing that Torske is a gray zone, in that Yampolivka was never under their control. And so really what's up for debate now is whether this counterattack was even launched in the first place, which is possible because it would be good for improving Russia's defensive positions, because they don't want the line to be so close to Kremina. And we also really haven't seen any news about Ukraine assaulting Kremina in the past few days, so it's possible that the front line moved a little bit. But again, the gains were over exaggerated, and we even have a video over here of Russia shelling Torske, so you can see that clearly Ukraine was present in the area. You can also see that there was another video of Ukrainian units in Torskaya released. I'm pretty sure it was like a day or two ago, and they were just roaming through the town and talking to civilians. So yeah, it's pretty clear that Torskaya is under Ukrainian control at the moment. The 14th Brigade in the Tavolzhanka Dvorichny bridgehead, they've actually been supplied with a surface-to-air missiles unit in order to help prevent Russian airstrikes in this area. So they were deployed around Dvorichny very recently. And I want to talk about what potential sort of movements could occur in this area in the future. Because as you see, this is the one area along the Oskil River where Russia has not actually withdrawn yet. And so this is interesting, and I have a theory for why that is. Because this is actually a pretty good line of defense for Russia, given the fact that it is so close to their border and that northern Luhansk is very rugged in terms of its terrain. You do have a lot of forests, especially along the Oskil, which sort of complicates advances in this area, and it will be difficult for the Ukrainian mechanized units to advance, especially once the new fortifications are built up. Troitska, which is a city over here, is a very important supply hub for Russia, which is supplying Svatove and Starobilsk and some of these very large towns in Luhansk. And so they don't want the line approaching this area, the Russians. They want to keep it as far away as possible. Right now, it is about, I would say, 23 miles away from the front line. And so they don't want the Ukrainians to find some sort of breakthrough over here and take it over. That would be a big issue for Russian logistics. Also, another problem that is presented is that if the 14th and 92nd Brigades are able to link up, then they can sort of go on this offensive and reach the administrative border between the Russians and Ukrainians over here and cut off whatever Russian units are stationed along the Oskil River. But I would posit that the amount of Russian units stationed in this area is very low compared to other parts of the front line. But anyway, that's all I have to say for today. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you later.